Retro Mags Revisited.
Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Retro Mags Revisited. Uh, in this series, we will be revisiting old retro video game magazines that I used to read as a kid. I know there's various other channels that do something similar, but this is my channel, and it's something I've been wanting to do for a while, so I figured why not. Um, for today's kickoff episode, we will be revisiting the December 1995 issue of GamePro magazine. It was the first video game magazine that I actually bought with my own money. I had read other magazines and gotten a few other freebies here and there, maybe something my parents got me to distract me, or some freebie through the mail, kind of like the original issue of Nintendo Power. But this is the first one that I actually saved my nickels and dimes for and bought myself at the grocery store. Unfortunately, we are going to be looking at the digital version of this magazine as my old print copy has mysteriously disappeared. Just like a lot of other things I collected as a kid that I left at my parents' house, it just kind of disappeared and has nowhere to be found. But that's okay. The digital copy that we have is from retromags.com, a really great website with a really awesome archive of old video game magazines, and they're expanding to other magazines as well. If you get a chance, check them out. We have no affiliation with them, but their site is awesome. I'd also recommend, if you can, feel free to support them. Really important work they're doing over there, archiving a lot of these classic magazines that could potentially be lost to time. So if you can support them, they have a Patreon and also some subscription plans. But just a really great site, and I think it's worth taking a look. But with that, we'll go ahead. We'll jump right in to the December 1995 issue of GamePro magazine. All right, and here is our December 1995 issue of GamePro in all of its digital glory. The part that got me to go ahead and spend the few dollars I had on this one was definitely the cover art. I had just bought Donkey Kong Country 2 and had dove in and was definitely enjoying my time with it. Was really loving it. Had loved the first one, and when I saw this there in the magazine section at my local grocery store, um, I figured the heck with it, and I spent a few bucks and picked it up. Hadn't really bought a magazine like this before, so I didn't really know too much about what it was going to be like. I'd only seen really like Nintendo Power for the most part, and Nintendo Power had a lot more strategies, and obviously was very focused on Nintendo only games. So this was my first time seeing something that was really truly covering multi-platform options across the magazine. But let's go ahead and dive in and take a look. All right, so as popular with magazines at the time, we had lots and lots of ads. Honestly, I kind of almost miss the ads. As goofy as they are, and sometimes invasive as they were, it was still kind of fun just to kind of see some of the stuff they come up with. So this one here is one for Donkey Kong Country 2. You'd see this same ad across a ton of different magazines around this time. This one here is an ad for Secret of Evermore. I actually picked this game up used several years after it came out. This one was an RPG, kind of like Secret of Mana, but not nearly as good. But this one was interesting, is that this one was actually developed here in the U.S. SquareSoft, now known as Square Enix, had taken a little bit of time and was trying to expand out some of their development options, including trying to create a development studio here in the United States. I'm not sure if they developed anything else after this one, but I know that was kind of the big thing that was unique about this one compared to other SquareSoft games of the time. And then here we have a just a general ad for 3DO, which I know a lot of folks probably don't even know what 3DO was, but it was an old 32-bit gaming system trying to compete with like the PlayStation and the Sega Saturn. Um, I always wanted one, never did get one, but this kind of shows like how they were trying to gear it more towards the older kids and maybe even adults, trying to advertise sex, drugs, violence, weapons. It's like, okay, guys, um, we get it. You're edgy, but The 3DO had a lot of kind of cinematic games on it, but honestly, not a whole lot of memorable ones. And we had here just kind of the GamePro, just list of editors and just kind of like some info options on there. Then we have another ad here for NFL Quarterback Club. Back in the day, there wasn't an exclusive NFL license with EA. So you actually had a ton of different NFL video games. Um, NFL Quarterback Club was one that was developed by Acclaim. I played a couple of them and they were okay. I never really got super into the sports games, but it was all right. We have kind of our normal table of contents here, followed by another ad. This Game Saver Plus was something I always wanted. Basically, it was like having a save state for your actual games. So you'd plug in your cartridge into this, and then plug the whole thing into your system like it shows, and you'd actually be able to save your game right where you're at. So just like you have save state on like these new retro releases they have, or like on Switch Online, or on emulators, it would let you do that, but with an actual game that you had. So that was actually sounded really cool to me, but never did have the money to get one of those, and no way would I have been able to explain to my mom why that would have been worth the money for, rather than just getting a new game or clothes or some other boring thing. Then we have a few more table of contents here, followed by a jeans ad. Um, I kind of remember. I actually remember this ad fairly well, mostly just because I like Basset Hounds. Then we have our ad for the Virtual Boy. Virtual Boy, which ironically we're gonna get to start seeing those games again here. I think next month maybe. I think in February there is when they're introducing Virtual Boy to Switch Online. You got to buy that goofy headset. But you can take a look here. This is like some of the initial advertisements they did with the Virtual Boy, which they chose not to show gameplay on this part of the ad at least. And then over here you'll see that "Play It Loud." That was one of the big catchphrases that Nintendo would use with a lot of their video game advertisements, not just in print but also in commercials. And then we got a PlayStation ad here as well. This one here, I honestly don't even know what this is an ad for. Let's see if we got. Oh, here we go. Warhawk. Never actually played that game. I'd heard a couple of my buddies had played it, but never really heard all that much about it. If you played it, let me know how it was. All right, now this is a section I always like to check out. This is the mailbag. So this is where you could write in and try and get your letters to GamePro published. Sometimes there were some interesting letters in there. Sometimes people were just complaining. It was always kind of interesting. I kind of like the first one here where they're talking a little bit about why sequels are like so similar to the first game, which they made some good points on there. Actually, they end up doing a whole editorial over here about it. Um, then they have a few other things here like Mortal Kombat for the SNES, and they're talking about the great reviews it got compared to the Genesis. Which I know some people took the reviews a little too seriously, but at the end of the day, it's like, did you like the game or not? Doesn't really matter what the review is. But I know some people did take it personally. Um, this question here is actually a good one. Does the Sony PlayStation play music CDs? That was something that we really didn't think about at the time because your video game console was just your console, and eventually somebody people started asking, well, the discs are CDs. Can I play CDs? And the answer is yes. All the CD based systems were able to actually play just regular music CDs. It didn't make the most sense because most of the time we all had it hooked up to like our little like TVs with crappy little speakers, and a lot of us had some kind of other boombox or other kind of maybe like the multiple piece stereo setups. But it was still kind of cool that it did that. This is kind of the precursor to say like the PS2, which then played DVDs, which honestly was way more useful. But yeah, those all did have a CD based player in them. But going through, you just have various other letters in here. GamePro would typically put in a little bit of a answer for you. Um, One of the things that I really liked back then was around this whole "You're Not Ready." So somebody writes in, the PlayStation ad on page 11 of your September issue has the words "Enos lives" at the end. Can you explain this? Spokesperson for Sony says that Enos lives is part of an ongoing marketing campaign that the company isn't ready to explain. The spokesperson did tell us that there are lots of hidden codes and clues in their ads. In fact, on that same page is some wordplay that reads, "You are not ready." Um, Look at the street signs and the ads featuring ESPN's Extreme Games for some hidden codes, and study the TV ads to find tricks for Battle Arena Toshinden. If I remember correctly, I think that the Enos Lives was around the release of. I think it was the actual release of the PlayStation. I probably should have looked that up, but maybe I'll add a note to the comments here if that's what it was. But I know it was definitely PlayStation oriented, and I could have sworn it was around the release date of the PlayStation in the US. But maybe I'll dig up some notes and add it to the description or something. But anyways, a few other letters in here. We won't go through them all. We'll kind of move on to our next section here. Next, they had the GamePro Gallery. GamePro Gallery was always pretty cool. I always wish I had some talent. A lot of great artists in here. I really like the Chrono Trigger one just because that Chrono Trigger is my favorite game of all time. But I also like some of the creativity they had with some of these crossovers. The Simpsons and Mortal Kombat, Earthworm Jim, Mortal Kombat was kind of cool. The Mario Fighter, which a little more gruesome than you think, but hey, maybe that's a precursor to Smash Bros. Um, what I do find interesting looking at this now is somebody coming in and putting in Lunar Eternal Blue. I didn't realize that game was popular enough to have some artwork submitted for it, but I guess it makes sense since it did get remade. I didn't play Lunar games until they came out on the PS1. As it was like Silver Star Story Complete for the first one, and then Lunar 2 Eternal Blue Complete, I think is what they called for the second one. I'd have to go check, but yeah, kind of cool seeing that here now, knowing what those games are. Next, they have a section they call the Cutting Edge, which is where they would talk a little bit about things, new tech that's coming out. This one was really cool. I always wanted one. It was the Sega Nomad. Basically, it was a lot like the Sega Game Gear, which was Sega's handheld that competed against the Game Boy. The only difference, though, is the Nomad played actual Genesis games. So it wasn't having to go and get like a Game Gear version of a game, which was always going to be like lower graphics, not nearly maybe as long. Just it's going to be a limited version of whatever game, just like they were for the Game Boy. But this played actual Genesis games, so it'd be like taking your actual Genesis with you on the road. So that honestly to me seemed really cool. But for $200, this one was just way out of my price range back then. $200 in like 1995, 1996 money. Probably somewhere like $400 or $500 now, maybe more. Which for me at the time I was about 11. So that'd be way, way out of my price range, and no way in heck that my mom would even consider getting me something like that when I already had my Super Nintendo at home. But then we have another ad here for the Power Rangers game, which I never actually played. Next section they have here is what they call Hot at the Arcades. Um, Basically, just going over some of the different games that are available in your arcades. Um, Arcades were prevalent enough back then where you could actually see this in a magazine and go and actually play these games in the arcades. Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, I think, would probably be the number one game at the time. Me personally, though, whenever I went to the arcades, I never did much with the fighting games. What I preferred was the shooters. So Virtual Cop 2 was one I definitely played in the arcades whenever I had some extra change, and my mom would let me escape at like the mall or something like that to the local arcade. They also had Fighting Vipers, which was actually a pretty cool 3D fighter game. I think it was 3D, or at least semi 3D, if not fully 3D. But that was another pretty cool game. It's been so long I can't remember too much about it. I was never very good at it, so that's why my quarters went more towards Virtual Cop than they would have gone for Fighting Vipers. Then they talk a little bit here about Marvel Superheroes. Marvel Superheroes, you can actually got re-released here not too long ago as part of the Marvel versus Capcom Fighting Collection, so you can definitely give that game a try. I definitely played it when on that collection when it came out, and I'm just as good as I was when I was a kid, which was pretty terrible. They also go over Cyberbots, And then this one here is probably my favorite arcade game of all time. Is Area 51. That's another shooter game, another light gun shooter. Like Virtual Cop, you have your little light gun where you're shooting enemies at the screen, but this one was all based off of shooting aliens. And if I ever saw an Area 51 machine and I had quarters, I would play it. The only other game that I think I would ever gravitate to as much as I would Area 51 would be the Simpsons arcade game. Area 51 I actually picked up on the PlayStation, which I unfortunately did not have a light gun for, so I played that darn thing all the way through with just using the controller. And trying to aim and shoot with the D-pad is not the fastest or most fun thing, but I had to make it through that game because I never could make it through in the arcades. So definitely worth playing if you ever get a chance, especially if you have a CRT and a light gun and can play it like with original hardware on the PlayStation, or if you find an arcade machine that has it. Definitely worth playing. Then we got another ad here for I think it was like Frank Thomas Baseball. Never played it, so I don't know too much about it. Or maybe these are just for baseball cards, actually. Yeah, I think these are just actual baseball cards. So I didn't collect that many cards, so it's not something I was super into myself. Then we have another one here for Quarterback Attack. This is another one I never really played, so I don't really know much about that one either. This one, I don't know what's up with this ad. So it's an ad for Toy Story. It's a blank page, and it just says, and they said it couldn't be done with an asterisk on they, and then giving us a description here. But this is it. I have no idea what the blank page is for. And this isn't just something unique to this digital copy. It was on the original actual print magazine, was a blank page, a few words, and Toy Story. Now I played Toy Story on the Super Nintendo, and it was actually pretty good for a licensed game. But I have no idea what they're trying to get at as far as this ad went. Like literally nothing's here. Next here they have kind of a little special here talking about the game makers or programming schools. So this is where they talk about DigiPen. So DigiPen was a basically kind of like a video game design school. I think at this point now I think they're located in Washington. At the time they were out in Vancouver, in Canada. I always once I read this, I for a few years really wanted to try to go to DigiPen because I wanted to be a video game developer. In my head I had all these thoughts of like I want to create this game, I want to create that game, I want to be some big developer, whatever. As I got older, I started to kind of move away from that thought. Once, as I saw that the pay isn't amazing, and two, I just don't have the patience for programming, debugging, all that kind of stuff. I just don't have the patience to sit down and do that kind of work. So by the time I actually got to college age, I'd already fallen out of wanting to be a developer. But when I was a kid, this was definitely something I thought I just had to do. But like I know a lot of us did, but like most of us did, I did kind of fall out of it as well. But good story going over different developers and some of the different things they're working on. And to those who did actually go through and actually are developing games now, more power to you. We definitely wouldn't be able to enjoy games like we do now if it wasn't for them. It just wasn't for me. Then we have an ad here for it looks like just general IBM, which if you look at it here, these are what our computers used to look like back in the day. I remember everything was wired, everything was gray. Those are the days. Looks like a little bit more here on DigiPen. And then we have an ad here for Nintendo Repair Center, which I think I only used that once, like when we broke our original Nintendo. And then after that, everything else I took such good care of. I never really had a console break until about the PS2 era. But a lot of those were when the little lens would go out, which the PS2 was notorious for. But otherwise, I took such good care of my systems, nothing else ever broke. Then we got another ad here. This one looks like some PlayStation Sports ads. NFL Game Day. So that's another one Like I said, we had a lot more NFL games before they had the license was just for EA, and then NHL Face Off. So those are actually pretty popular games for the PlayStation uh, way back when. Then they have another special feature here. Ah, so this one is for an interactive game called Fox Hunt. So basically, the idea with this one, um, it was to make a movie that was interactive that you could then play like a video game, and it was kind of more cinematic than some of the things you would have seen on PC or even on PlayStation at the time. They tried to get some actual Hollywood names to be in it. They tried to create it to be an actual interactive movie. Um, it didn't sell all that well, but it did come out. It did end up coming out for both PC and for the PlayStation. Never did come out for this for the Sega Saturn, and I think they were working on a Mac version as well, but I don't think that came out either. Um, but somehow they did manage to get just enough success where they ended up being able to get a little more funding for it after the game versions came out. They added a few more scenes, then actually released it as a direct to video movie as well. I never played the game or watched the movie, so if anyone knows anything about the quality of either, feel free to leave a comment. I wouldn't expect that it would have been all that great, but hey, maybe it was, and y'all can surprise me. But after that, we have more of our fancy gross out ads, which were kind of common at the time for a baseball game on the Virtual Boy, but won't stay too long there. Next, we have the Jaguar. Jaguar was a 64-bit system, kind of like the 3DO. It was trying to compete with PlayStation and Saturn, but just wasn't doing all that well. Despite being 64 bits, which at the time made it so much more, theoretically more powerful than the competing hardware, it just didn't look like it. The games weren't, for the most part, the games weren't great. There's a few decent ones on there. They're always trying these different ads to try to get you to jump into the Jaguar realm. It just never really worked. If you're looking at this one here, I mean, can you connect the dot? And they're talking about how for 149 bucks a 64-bit Jaguar makes more sense than paying 300 bucks for a 32-bit system. But if the games aren't any fun, it's like you can have as many bits as you want. I mean, there are a few decent games on there, just not enough to really ever help it gain any steam. Then they have a special feature here on Garfield. There's an actual Garfield game that got developed, which I actually never played myself. Um, on this one, they have a good interview here with Jim Davis, the creator of Garfield. Kind of a cool little feature to go through, and they do actually do a review of the Garfield game. I believe it's later in this issue, so I think we'll actually get to that. Kind of funny though, because if I remember right, the review was not great. So hopefully Jim Davis didn't take it too personally that he took his time to do this interview just to get trolled on the reviews a little bit. Then we have a accessories ad here for Interact. Interact used to make a ton of accessories for all the video game consoles back in the 90s. Taking a look at it here, they had it for pretty much every system. I mean, heck, they even had a control for the 3DO. The SN Pro Pad for the SNES. This one I actually had. So it was a turbo controller, which is actually pretty useful for certain games. Um, there was a whole lot of details about people saying that reports of people saying that third-party accessories would damage your system. So I was always really hesitant to get anything that was third-party. I did make an exception for this control. Never had any issue with it. It worked fine. And then there's a little teaser down here. It says, "Watch out for the sharks coming soon." So I'm thinking that that was probably a little bit of a teaser for what was going to be called eventually the Game Shark, which was this little cheat device that you could add for your to your game consoles, a lot like the Game Genie was, but like a new evolution of it. Interesting story about with Interact is they actually have a pretty complicated history. Initially, they were known as STD Entertainment. Yeah, horrible name, I know. Um, And so, for good reason, they ended up going ahead and rebranding to the name Interact. In 1995, the parent company of SD Entertainment was purchased by a company called Recoton, if I'm saying that right. Recoton. And then they officially were renamed to Interact Accessories Inc. Recoton eventually went bankrupt in 2001, which kind of led to the end of Interact. All the intellectual properties that they had and patents ended up getting bought by another company, another accessory company called Intech in 2003. Intech got kind of famous for selling a lot of accessories around the GameCube era, for the PS2, the Xbox around that time. But then when I was doing research for Intech, I found all I could find was that it turns out that they filed a voluntary dissolution in 2014 in the state of Florida, so they're also no more. So anything that's left from Interact at this point, I think, is pretty much gone. I have no idea if anyone holds the rights to any of these old accessories that they created. But yeah, they were big back in the '90s, and probably the number one um, third-party accessory company back in the day. And then included with every issue of GamePro is always plenty of these little cards here trying to get you to go ahead and subscribe. So a year subscription was $19.97, which was actually a pretty good price. I probably should have pointed out on the cover, but the cover price when you bought at the newsstand was like $5. So for a year, if you bought it from the newsstand, you'd be paying roughly $60 compared to only about $20 if you subscribed. So they're always definitely trying to push for you to get the full subscription on there. And it was funny seeing these here. Like, I never realized that these went to Boulder, Colorado, which is not too far away from where I grew up. Probably about hour and 15 minutes from where I grew up or so. So that's kind of neat to see that. Then they always had these little surveys here where you could try and win a free game. I filled these out a couple of times, never had any luck. These ones went to San Mateo, so I'm sure they had different companies helping with all these different things across the country. But yeah, I never did actually win a game. And they have another special feature here, the Blockbuster Champs. So this was the World Video Game Finalists here. Um, with these ones, it was just the story about different winners at this video game competition that was put together by Blockbuster back in the day. Um, Back then, I mean, even now, gaming still seems like it's predominantly kind of a male-oriented hobby. Although there's definitely a lot more women getting into it all the time. But yeah, I think there's only one girl that was in there, and you could definitely see her in any of the pictures because it was always easy to spot her whenever she was around. But the story just kind of goes over some of the different gaming they did around there. A little bit of story about all the different contestants. Then we have another ad here for Capcom. They're showing off, I think that's Breath of Fire 2, Mega Man. I want to say it's probably X3, and then Final Fight 3, I believe. We have another ad here for Wing Commander. That game's kind of cool and actually stars Mark Hamill, Ian McDowell, and John Rhys Davies. That's another one. They also talk about Tom Wilson and Jason Bernard. I don't know who those are, but having a game that has Luke Skywalker, the bad guy from Star Trek Generations, and then one of our side characters from Indiana Jones or Gimli from Lord of the Rings was quite the setup they had for a cast for a game back in the day. Then we have another ad here. These are the ones you'd have to kind of turn vertically for Road Rash, which I'll be honest, I never actually played that one, but I'd heard decent things about it at least. All right, now is where we start some of our reviews. So, first review here we have is Doom Special Edition for the PlayStation. Um, so this one was the first review that I ever read, just kind of going through the book, and perfect 5 out of 5. This was actually probably one of the best ports they've had of Doom for any console. I never played Doom on the PlayStation just because I didn't have a PlayStation for the first few years that it existed. But I read through this review pretty extensively and ended up renting Doom on the Super Nintendo, which it's not a great port, but it's better than it has any right to be honest. But this review here is on Doom. They definitely loved every part of it. When it came to the GamePro reviews, it's always kind of cool because they'd include like pro tips just to give you a few little hints about that'll help you when you're playing through the game. On the review breakdowns, they would have graphics, sound, control, fun factor, and then they have challenge. And then they would take some time to give you just some of the basic stats. So some of the stuff doesn't really matter too much. Like, yes, it's on CD, of course it is. It's on PlayStation. 2 players, 50 levels, so just a few different types of detail. But the big thing we always would look at would just be the actual score. Then we have a review here for Mortal Kombat 3 on the PlayStation. Still pretty decent scores. A 4, 4.5s, and a 4 for fun factor. Mortal Kombat 3. I never actually played Mortal Kombat 3. The one I ended up jumping back into was Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3. So I never actually played just regular Mortal Kombat 3. Then we have ourselves an ad here for DC versus Marvel Comics. Looks like these are some trading cards back in the day. Never was that much of a card collector back then, so nothing I was really familiar with. I do like the Batman versus Captain America graphic, though. That does look pretty cool. Then we have another review here for WrestleMania. They gave this one 2 5.0s, a 4.5, and another 5.0. This is actually one of the first games I owned on PlayStation, and that's just because when I bought my PlayStation, it came with WrestleMania as a promotion at my local toy store. I say it was still one of the first I owned. It wasn't actually the first PlayStation game I owned. The first PlayStation game that I owned was Xenogears. Before I bought my PlayStation, I was shopping around looking for it, and me and my family gone to a flea market, and one of the sellers there was selling a brand new copy of Xenogears for $20. So I didn't even have a PlayStation yet. I knew I was gonna buy one because I was saving up my money for it. But for $20, I couldn't pass it up. So I bought Xenogears before I even had a damn PlayStation, and I don't regret buying that whatsoever. Xenogears is probably one of my favorite games of all time, and definitely one of my favorite, if not my favorite, PS1 game. It's up there with like Final Fantasy 9 and Resident Evil 2. So hard to say which one my favorite is, but Xenogears definitely up there. Top three at the worst as far as my favorite PlayStation 1 games go. Then we have another ad here. So this is for the Aura Interactor. I know that it looks a little bit weird here. It's just because the way that it was set up in the magazine. There's not really a good way for them to have scanned it. But it's basically it's a 2-page fold, and it had like a card in there as well for you to try to get a rebate in for it. But basically, what this would do is it was almost like a full vest rumble pack. From what I understood on this is you would wear it, and it would kind of connect to the system, and it would pick up like bass. And so whenever it's picking up the bass signal, this thing would rumble. Not nearly as advanced as say even a rumble pack, which was based on programming in the actual game. So this would just kind of make assumptions based on what you were hearing as far as the game sound goes, and then try to rumble that from there. Never had one, never even thought to ask for one, but I think it probably would have been pretty cool if you were a rich kid where you could actually fill your games. But yeah, definitely some of the most rudimentary of that now. Nothing like that, the full haptic feedback vests and things like that you get now with your VR games. But it still could have been kind of cool as a kid. Next, I have a review here for Agile Warrior. Honestly, even back then, I'd never heard of this game outside of this review. Never played it. Never knew anyone who did play it. It got pretty good review. 4.5 for fun factor. Just nothing at all that I'm familiar with. Have an ad here for some DC Comics. Then we have some more reviews here. Um, First review here is for Air Combat. Not super great reviews there, which is kind of surprising. Air Combat here in the U.S. Did eventually become known as Ace Combat. Kind of an interesting story on the naming there. Air Combat was based off of the an arcade game of the same name that released in Japan and in the U.S. And when they decided to create a console version for it, they kept the same name of Air Combat here in the U.S. But then they renamed it Ace Combat in Japan. And then eventually they decided then that they were just going to name all of the console versions, both domestic and over in Japan, as Ace Combat. So that's why you don't really see the Air Combat name out there anymore, as this did eventually just become the Air Combat series or Ace Combat series. But I was surprised at how low the reviews were, considering how well it actually did as far as sales go, and just as big as the franchise ended up becoming. But then we have another review here for Nova Storm, which never played or heard of that, but it looks like I wasn't missing much. Assuming Mr. Air Hendricks here knew what he was talking about. Then we have a ad here for Spawn, another game I didn't get a chance to play, but I did watch the TV series on HBO, which I probably really was not old enough to watch, but it was a super cool series. So I definitely had to watch that behind my parents' back when they weren't paying attention. Then we got ourselves an ad here for the original Tekken on PS1. Was never good at Tekken. When it came to fighting games, the only ones I'm really passable at are Street Fighter and Smash Brothers. I was also randomly good at Battle Arena Toshinden, but just the first one. I sucked at the second one, never played the third one, and I'm just really bad at pretty much all other fighting games. I still like to play them. I'm just not good at them. Then we got another review here for Virtual Fighter Remix on the Saturn. Now, I never had a Sega Saturn, nor did any of my friends have a Saturn. Growing up, most of us had Super Nintendo, and then when we got a little older, some of us had the N64, and some of us had a PlayStation. I got lucky, and eventually I'd saved enough money and got both the PlayStation and the N64, but I never did actually get a Sega Saturn. So any of these Saturn games I never actually played firsthand. Well, one thing they did kind of cool here though is they did grab a couple of the kids that were part of that Blockbuster video game tournament, and they brought them in to be guest reviewers, and they had them review Virtual Fighter as well. So you had King Kane and Tricky Ricky, which is pretty cool. And then we have another one of our famous gross out ads of the 90s here. This one's for Gex. Gex itself was a decent 2D game, typical side scroller. Wasn't super fan of them biting through this wasp or bee or whatever this thing is. So could have done without that, but the game itself was okay. Then we had Rayman. Rayman's another one that I missed out on when it first came out. It came out on I know it came out on the Saturn, came out on the PlayStation. I think it actually came out for the 3DO and the Jaguar as well. Where I ended up playing it though was it was actually a launch title for the Game Boy Advance. So that's where I played Rayman for the first time. I enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty fun. When I was a kid, I always played the saxophone, so I always liked seeing this saxophone enemy guy, and I was kind of curious about what his deal was. But they gave this one a solid score, 4.0, so 4 out of 5. Not too shabby. I think they're spot on with the graphics though to 5.0 because those colors are really popping back in the day, and even on the Game Boy Advance, the graphics were still pretty good. Then we have an ad here for Final Fight. Final Fight 3, which is what I think was in that 3-game Capcom ad we saw earlier. And then they also talk a little bit about the hint line. The hint lines were interesting because if you didn't know how to get through a game and you didn't have a magazine or play like a guide for it or whatever, a lot of the video game companies would have these little hint lines. There are 1-900 numbers that you would dial, and they would actually charge you per minute that you're on there talking to somebody. The funny part, though, is that 1-900 numbers were also used for these, we'll say, adult calls you could make, where you would talk to, we'll say, some professionals about adult subjects is where we'll leave that. So if you called one of these hint lines, one, you'd be in trouble because your parents probably would think that you're calling a different type of number. Two, you would, even when if they found out that it was a video game number, you're still in trouble because that's pretty expensive if you to talk to somebody for a few minutes. So 79 cents a minute for record info or 99 cents per minute to speak with a counselor. You talk to somebody for 15 minutes, and that's more than it would cost for you to go buy a guide. So those were definitely not the cheapest way to get answers on your games. Now that we have the internet, the thought of a phone tip line is completely unheard of, but that used to be a thing. Then we have a couple more reviews here. Dark Legend and Minnesota Fats Pool Legend. I have no idea about either one of these games. Dark Legend looks like a fighting game, and then obviously this Minnesota Fats is a pool game. Hadn't played either one of them. Never heard anything about them outside of just this review. Um, then we got ourselves over here a ad for Rayman, which a pretty basic ad, but still a pretty decent game. Then we got reviews here for Mansion of Hidden Souls. Mansion of Hidden Souls. It's hard to describe the game, but later in this issue, there's a review for a game called D, and the easiest way I could think of Mansion of Hidden Souls is kind of like the Timu version of D. Just not nearly as good graphically, presentation wise. Just not quite as good as what D was. And then we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get there. Then they have a review here for Shanghai Triple Threat. It looks like another kind of gambling game. Maybe it's just a puzzle game. I can't tell from here, but nothing I'd ever heard of either. Then we have ourselves a ad for America Online. Yeah, back then you would subscribe to dial-up internet, and they would actually send you to install it a 3.5-inch floppy disk for Windows, Mac, or DOS, or a CD-ROM, or the 5.25 floppy disk. The 5.25s are the floppy disks that were really floppy. Your 3.5 disks were still called floppy disks for the most part, but they weren't floppy. They were actually pretty sturdy. And it's for the young kids. That's what your save icon is based off of. Was the old 3.5-inch floppy disk. But in order to get internet, you'd actually have to install the program on your computer, and then it would dial up a hopefully local number to connect you to the internet. If you didn't have a local number available that you could dial into, you would then have to dial long distance and then potentially have long distance charges, which for anybody who's like under 30 years old, the entire statement I just made makes 0 sense, which is fine. It's just kind of the way that internet was back in the day and what we had to deal with. And then we have an ad, ironically, for GamePro Online snuck in here as well. So it looks like kind of a joint ad between GamePro and America Online. America Online was interesting because it would connect you to the internet, but then they also kind of had a little section where you started off with before you got to the actual web, where they had what they called keywords. So you go to you type in a keyword, so in this case GamePro, and you go to this little section within America Online that was specifically curated as kind of like an easier way version of the internet, almost like an internet light, and you could go and check out a lot of the different keywords they had there. And like GamePro would have one. You'd find ones for shopping, ones for other game sites and other places, things like that. But it was interesting because at first, when I went through, and we first got internet, we did go through America Online, and I would go to these keywords, and then I didn't really realize that I could also then go to like www.whatever.com and then get to the rest of the internet. It took me a couple months before I kind of got out of the little AOL framework of America Online and actually jumped into the internet proper. And then that's when I really started to kind of see what else was really out there outside of the curated experience that you got from the get go. Next, we have some reviews for the 32X. For those who don't know, the 32X was a add-on for the Sega Genesis. There's a whole history behind that. You can find a ton of videos about it. I think Gaming Historian had a really good one. Being a video game nerd talked about it too. But basically, 32X was an add-on to the Genesis that they're trying to use to help it stay relevant longer into its life cycle once the other 32-bit consoles came out. So for reviews for these ones, we got WWF WrestleMania again, the arcade game. Pretty much almost the exact same reviews we got with the PlayStation version, just a little bit lower, which isn't too much of a surprise. And then this other game called Colibri, just like some of these other ones, never heard of it, never saw anything beyond this review about it, so I know nothing. If anyone in the comments knows, feel free to share. Then we have another WrestleMania review on here. This is just for the straight up Genesis. So if you have just your Genesis, but you don't have the 32X add on, here's just the regular Genesis game. Again, about the same reviews. 4.5 fun factor is the important one. So everyone at GamePro seemed to really like this game. I'll be honest, I know I talked about earlier how this was my first PlayStation game. I didn't really like it that much. I played it a little bit. I like playing as the Undertaker, but that was really about it. It never really caught my attention. I couldn't play it for more than just like a few minutes at a time before I would want to go back and play something like Xenogears or Final Fantasy VII or heck even like Wild Arms or something like that. Actually, you know what? I play Brave Fencer Musashi over this one because low key Brave Fencer Musashi is awesome, and I wish that they would port that out to current hardware. But then next we got ourselves an ad here for Blockbuster. Couple things on this one. So Blockbuster, I'm sure at least some of the youngsters know of it. And it's where you used to go to rent video games, movies, and you could also rent video game hardware. So what was really cool is that if you didn't have enough money to like buy a console, but you really want to play a game, you could rent the console and the game from your local Best Buy. So in this ad here, they had a coupon to save you a few bucks on renting the system and a couple games, which is actually a pretty good deal when you look at it. I rented a PlayStation from Blockbuster a couple of times before I eventually bought one. The first time I rented a PlayStation, I remember I got Alien Trilogy, Street Fighter Alpha, and Battle Arena Toshinden. And I thought all of those were pretty decent games. Played Battle Arena Toshinden. It's actually Battle Arena Toshinden 2. Um, thought all those were pretty decent. My brother had come to visit. He had moved out of state and he'd come home to visit, and I pestered him to help pitch in for renting one. And he finally gave in, and we rented it. Had a decent amount of fun with it. Didn't think anything of it based on those games that I played. Like Alien Trilogy had a password system, and the other two were just fighting games I just kind of played through. Then when I later on my own, I saved up some money and I rented a PlayStation because I really wanted to play Final Fantasy VII and I wanted to play Resident Evil 2. So I decided to rent both of those in one weekend, which was a terrible idea considering both of those games deserve your entire weekend, and should not have to. You should not split the time between the two at once. And the big mistake that I made, though, being a super from I played the Nintendo, and then after I had the Super Nintendo, and then I had the Nintendo 64. And with all those previous systems, you didn't need a memory card because you would save on the cartridge. And it just didn't click in my head that when playing on a PlayStation, when I rent one, that I wouldn't have a way to save because they definitely did not give you a memory card when you rented those. So I was playing Resident Evil, and when it was time to stop playing, I just had to stop. I just had to turn off the system and start over. And then I ended up spending an entire day playing through Final Fantasy VII during one of my 3 days of the rental, and I played until you get out of Midgar, but I had no way of saving the game. So then when I had to return it, I just had to shut it off, and there was my game gone forever. So I did eventually pick up Final Fantasy VII on the PC of all things, which my PC unfortunately did not support the game very well, so it didn't play great, but I still played it anyways. And then I actually ended up beating Resident Evil 2 for the first time on the N64 port that came out. And then eventually I did buy a PlayStation, and then I picked up both of those games with a memory card and played through them both again the proper way. But it was kind of cool to be able to rent those systems back in the day. I do wish they'd give you an option for getting a memory card, though, so you could actually save. Next, we have some more reviews here. We have Zoop. Zoop they put on pretty much every console in existence at the time. It was a puzzle game. I never actually got around to playing it, but I actually saw a fair amount of ads for it, even on TV. It looked kind of fun, but when it came to like doing like a weekend rental or trying to spend actual like 50, $60 on a video game, puzzle games were never at the top of my list. So I never actually played Zoop. Then we have ourselves an ad here for Gargoyles, which was a really awesome cartoon back in the day. It was one of my favorites. I never got around to playing the game, but it has been re-released out on modern consoles, so it is something you can play today if you want to. Yep, and here it is. Here's that review for the Garfield game. And poor Jim Davis took the time to do an interview just for his game to get a 3.5, a 3, a 2, and a 2.5. So that's a downer. I'm not too surprised though. I wouldn't expect the Garfield game to really be a top-notch game. It's just another licensed game, and most of them usually aren't going to be all that great. We have an ad here for Zoop, which we just saw the review for. Like I said, there's a lot of ads for Zoop all over the place. And then we have a review here for Batman Forever on the Genesis, which you see the digitized graphics on this one makes it look almost like a Mortal Kombat game. Not a great review. I think Angry Video Game Nerd did cover this game too in one of his videos. I never played it. I didn't have a Genesis, so and I didn't really know too many people who had Genesis either. Nor did anyone play that one, so I just don't know anything about it firsthand other than just what I've seen. Then we got another ad here for Mega Man X3, which was actually the first of the Mega Man X games that I played. I rented that one a couple times from my local video store. Eventually played, I think, almost all the way through this one. I'm not sure if I ever actually beat it, but I did play pretty close to the end of that one, which I definitely enjoyed it. I know a lot of people say Mega Man X is the best one. My favorite is still Mega Man X3, but that's mostly just the nostalgia since that was the first one that I played. Then we have an ad here for NBA Live 96. So just another sports game. Um, Typical simulator sports game trying to be realistic. The NBA Live games are fine. They're made by EA. They're fairly popular back in the day. And then here we go. The main reason I bought this issue, the review of Donkey Kong Country 2: Diddy's Conquest, which it took me longer than I would like to admit for me to put together Diddy's Conquest and was just a play on words saying Diddy's Conquest. So same thing with like King K. Rool. It took me way too long to realize it was King Cruel, basically, but I digress. Perfect score for this one, which is definitely earned. Donkey Kong Country 2. I honestly don't know if I like the first Donkey Kong Country or Donkey Kong Country 2 better. I love both of them very much. Both are awesome. Both are classics. I still will boot them up like on Switch Online to this day and play for a little while. I really just enjoyed beginning to end both games. So hard to say which one's better. Obviously, here perfect score 5.0 graphics, 5.0 sound, 5.0 control, 5.0 for the fun factor. I don't know what they mean by the challenge necessarily because the challenge is what the challenge is, but whatever. Some of the details I would give you here, though, they used to tell you how many megs the game was. The idea around letting you know how many megs is for you to know, I guess, theoretically, maybe how big or long the game might be. But that really didn't mean much because you'd have some higher meg games that were still pretty short just because a lot of it went to the graphics. And a game even with high megs could still be not that great. But they give you some other details here. The list price here, $70. A little bit more about the levels, 2 players. So they give you a little bit more detail in here as well. But the big thing that mattered was definitely the score. And they had a ton of pro tips on here for you. They also talk a little bit about the different animal buddies you get throughout the game and just had a really good review with a lot of details on there. And definitely a fantastic game. If you haven't played it, I do recommend you go back. Get that on Switch Online. I think you can probably find it on the Super Nintendo Classic as well. Go get an emulator, whatever you gotta do. But fun game. Definitely a lot of good memories about Donkey Kong Country 2. Next, they have a review here for Earthworm Jim 2. So this is one that I never owned, but I definitely rented. Played through a good amount of this game as well. I think I beat it. If I didn't beat it, I came really close. So Earthworm Jim 2, though, this one rated really well with them as well. 4.5s across the board. I know it gets the Earthworm Jim games get a little bit of hate for some reason, but I just think they're kind of funny and goofy. I also watched the cartoon back in the day when it was on Kids WB, and I frankly just really enjoyed Earthworm Jim 2. My son watched me play a little bit of this on Switch Online, and he was just like, "Dad, this is weird," and like left. So I guess maybe it's just a game where you just have to have the right taste, or maybe just a game of its time. I don't know. But Earthworm Jim 2 was another one that I did actually really enjoy. Then we got a review here for Final Fight 3. Never actually did play Final Fight 3. I think the only one I ever played was Final Fight 2. But this one here didn't got some middling reviews, which when you just kind of get to the third game in the series, is not too surprised, especially towards the end of the Super NES life cycle. Then we have an ad here for MechWarrior 3050. That's a game I did play a little bit as well. I know I rented that from the local video game store. Here's our ad here for Mega Man X3. Mostly 4.0s across the board with a 4.5 in there. I definitely enjoyed it. I thought it was great. I would have given it a little higher than a 4.0. I probably would have given it a 4.5 myself, but I did rather enjoy Mega Man X3. Then we have an ad here for Skeleton Warriors. Beyond the title and this graphic here, that's all I know about it. Never played it, never heard of it again. Then there's a review for Spawn. Kind of middle of the road reviews on here. Kind of wish I played that one though, just since I like the cartoon so much, but never did get around to playing that. Then we do have an ad here for D, which I had mentioned earlier. D, I did eventually get to pick up. It was actually a really good game. A few more reviews here for the Super Nintendo. We got Zoop, kind of middle of the road reviews again. Puzzle game. Like I said, never really got my attention. Mech Warrior 3050. That was kind of a fun action adventure mech shooting game. Not enough that I ever would have bought it, but it was definitely worth renting a couple times. I know sometimes my parents have something to do for like all day, like on a weekend, so they'd rent me a game and just to keep me occupied. And this is one of the games that I would play a couple different times whenever they kind of left me to my own devices. Then we have an ad here for Scramble Cobra, which I frankly never heard of, but that was on the Panasonic 3DO. And then here we go, pro review here for D. So this one had almost a perfect score with 5.0 for graphics, sound, and control, and a 4.5 for fun factor. So on this one, I don't know what it was about this particular review, but this one just I was enamored with wanting to play this game. Like I read the review, I know it was a dark story. It was definitely more of a mature story. Despite everything that happened in there, still being rated teen's kind of crazy. But I read it and I was like, I really had to play this game. And for years, I thought about trying to buy like a 3DO to play like this version of the game and everything. Never did get a 3DO. I did eventually get the game. I ended up getting it on PlayStation. Came across like 4 or 5 CDs to for the whole game. Um, Super cool game, super cool concept. I really enjoy it. It's not a very long play either because you actually play on a timer. So you have to beat it within, I think it's like an hour and a half or 2 hours or something like that. So you don't actually have a ton of time to make it through the whole game. But it's very atmospheric. It has a very unique way of taking you through the story. So if you get a chance to play it, I recommend you play it. I'm sure you could trying to find a retro copy of it. I'm sure will set you back a few bucks, but I'm sure there'll be other inventive ways you could figure out of a way to play this one. But D, fantastic game. I still just don't know how it caught my attention. Just never let go. And then over here we have a ad for Cyberdillo, another 3DO ad. No idea anything about this game either. Then they had a bunch of quick hits on several different 3DO games. Crime Patrol 2, which is another one that kind of like their cinematic light gun games. Then we have Mazer, Panzer General, Flying Nightmares. For the most part, mostly middling reviews. Fight Nightmare's doing a little bit better, but the 3DO just wasn't all that popular, so it didn't really get too many games that are much better than these. Then we have Iron Angel: The Apocalypse: The Return. Again, I know nothing of that one. Those 3DO games, I never knew anyone who had a 3DO. When the 3DO first came out, that thing was like $700 or something like that. So nobody in my town really would have been able to afford one anyways if they'd wanted one. It did eventually drop down to like the $300 range, but at that point you get a PlayStation or a Saturn for like the same price. So nobody was really looking at the 3DO. I wanted one. Never got one, but I did want one. I don't know why I wanted one. Probably just for D. But yeah, never got one of those. Then we have a review here for Polestar and the Neo Geo. Pretty decent review on this one. So this one here is kind of a side-scrolling shooter game, it looks like. Never played anything on the Neo Geo. The Neo Geo was super expensive just because it was almost like it was as close to getting like arcade hardware at home as you could get. And so you had to pay for it to really if you wanted that. If you look at this, I mean, we're looking at 232 megs like on a cartridge, which is unheard of compared to like the 32 megs we saw on the Super Nintendo. So yeah, those games are the games and the systems are just a lot more pricey and way out of my price range. Then we have an ad over here for Tecmo Super Bowl 3. Tecmo Super Bowl were definitely my favorite football games when it came to the Nintendo and the Super Nintendo. I played a ton of Tecmo Super Bowl on the Super Nintendo, and I think it was just Tecmo Bowl. I think was on the NES. But those are my two favorite football games that I played was the Tecmo ones. I was really bummed out when they stopped making those because those were the only football games I actually really liked and actually was at least somewhat good at. We have more ads here for a Namco fighting game. I don't remember which one this one is. It's called Weapon Lord. Nothing ever played, so I'm not too familiar with it. So if anyone listening here has played it, feel free to tell us a little bit about it in the comments. Let me get here to the sports section of GamePro. So here's Madden 96, which they gave of a 5.0 for fun factor. And then for the Genesis as well, which also got a 5.0 for fun factor. Pretty similar reviews across the board between the two. Similar experience. Madden was okay. I was never super into it. I always, like I mentioned before, like the Tecmo NFL games over the Madden. I think there's more arcadey on the Tecmo Bowl, so I think it's probably why I liked it more. But this is when Madden started to gain popularity. Then we have an ad here for Vector Man. Vector Man was kind of a Sega Genesis flagship character for a little bit. From what I know, it was a pretty decent game. I played it like since. For me, it didn't really age well, but I think at the time it probably would have been considered pretty close to like an instant classic. Then we have another ad snuck over here on the side for looks like primetime football with Deion Sanders. So again, back when the NFL license wasn't exclusive to EA, we would find all kinds of different NFL games. So this one here, about a 4.0, so not bad, but nothing I ever played, so I can't speak too much about it. And then we have FIFA 96, so 4.5 on that one for both the Super NES and the Genesis. I never really got into soccer, so I never really played any of the FIFA games. So supposedly they were pretty good, but just nothing I ever tried. Then we have an NFL ad over here with Junior Seau. He used to play for the San Diego Chargers. Me being a Bronco fan, I got to see this guy twice a year, and man, did he wreck things sometimes. Um, I remember we used to call him Junior Say Ouch because he would hit really hard. And being a Bronco fan, you sometimes did not like to see him just lay into some of your favorite players. But it looks like they're advertising here Quarterback Club, and then can't quite tell what that one is back there. And then they're also talking about some of the cards and some of the merchandise you can buy. So just kind of a general NFL ad. Then we got NBA Live 96, which 4.5. Again, decent basketball game. Nothing that I really played though. When it came to the basketball games, what I liked was NBA Jam. NBA Jam's where it's at because it was a lot more arcadey, a lot more goofy, over the top. So definitely a lot more of my style than the simulation sports game. Then over here on the Jaguar, they have White Men Can't Jump, which I can't believe that got made into a game. That was a comedy with Woody Harrelson and I think it was Wesley Snipes in that one. Um, yeah, the movie, it was a rated R movie, so I didn't get to watch it like all the way through. Be another one of those movies I had to sneak in on HBO when my parents weren't looking. So I was definitely not expecting to see this as a game on the Jaguar, but special license game on the Jaguar. But hey, here we are, 2.0. So I guess I didn't miss much not having a Jaguar to play this one. Then we have an ad over here for NFL Full Contact. So another game in the another NFL game. This one made by Konami. Like I said, so many more games, so much more competition when it came to football games before that EA license. We got a PGA Tour game, and then Power Serve Tennis. I haven't played any tennis game outside of Mario Tennis, so I have no opinion on these. But it looks like PGA Tour was pretty. Oh, actually, no. I don't know why I'm saying tennis. One is a golf game, so my brain's not working. So we got PGA Tour 96, which is a golf game, which I haven't played a golf game other than Mario Golf. And then a tennis game over here, Power Serve Tennis, which I haven't played a tennis game since other than Mario Tennis. So no real opinions on those. Looks like middling to not so great. Then we got NBA Give and Go over here, another game by Konami. Nothing I'd ever played, so no opinion there. I've got a full ad here for Chrono Trigger, which in my opinion is the greatest video game of all time. Definitely my number one favorite game. Really hoping they do a proper port to modern consoles at some point. Perhaps of the 3DS or the DS version would be a good one, but I'd take any version at this point. The fact that this is not easy to play on modern consoles is kind of ridiculous. I mean, you can't right now. The closest you can do, you can play it on Steam, you can play it on your cell phone, or you can play the PS1 classic version on your PlayStation 3, which is ridiculous. The original Super NES version, you can't play it anywhere. You can play the DS version if you have the cart on your 3DS or a DS, but that's about it. The original Super Nintendo version, though, you can't play that anywhere, which is to me is crazy. Like they took the time and they re-released Chrono Cross, which is a newer game and in my opinion not nearly as good. The fact that we can't play Chrono Trigger any version of it on the Switch, a PS4, PS5, or an Xbox series system at all, to me is just absolutely insane. So hopefully they'll start doing something with that. Last year they announced they're going to do something for Chrono Trigger's 30th anniversary, but they've done almost nothing. So here's hoping we get some kind of announcement and at least a basic port. Like if you're not going to give me a remake, just port the thing and I'll be happy. But here now they have what they call the role players realm. So this is where they would cover the different RPGs. So here it is, Secret of Evermore. Like I had mentioned before when we saw the ad, that this was Square's first American-made title. They gave it a 4.0, so pretty decent score, but nothing to really that's gonna really light up the world about. Then we have an ad over here for Breath of Fire 2. So this one, the Breath of Fire series is actually pretty popular for Capcom, and I think Breath of Fire 2 is one of the better ones, at least as far as reviews went. Then we have Romance of the Three Kingdoms 4 on the Saturn, which I honestly have no experience with, along with Virtual Hydlide, which at the time I didn't know anything about Hydlide. Since in the several years since I first read this magazine, I've read about the original Hydlide, and then I've read a little bit about this one as well. So I feel like I'm not missing much, though it did get fairly middle of the road reviews. Then we have a little bit an advertisement here over for Marvel Masterpieces. Then we have some nice little kind of guide for Chrono Trigger. Kind of funny story on this. I had bought this magazine and read all the way through this magazine several months before I ever actually played Chrono Trigger. And by the time I actually got around to playing Chrono Trigger, I forgot that this darn walkthrough was in here. So there's so much good information in this issue, and I completely wasted it because I forgot that this was in here by the time I actually got around to playing Chrono Trigger. So it would have been cool if I'd had it, but at the same time, I think maybe exploring the world of that game on my own and figuring everything out on my own probably made that experience that much better. But I do laugh to this day if I had a guide that took me through lots of different pieces that I just completely forgot about by the time I played it. Um, but then over here on the right we have another ad. This one's for Emmitt Smith football. Emmitt Smith was a premier running back for the Dallas Cowboys back in the 90s. And then I know he played a little bit of time for the Arizona Cardinals as well. This one was developed by JVC, which mostly is known for um, selling TVs and stereos and stuff like that. So it's kind of crazy to see them on the cover of a video game. But I know it's like beating a dead horse. I've said it a bunch of times. This is back before we had the exclusive EA contracts, so you had games, NFL games from all over the place. Then we have more on that guide here for Chrono Trigger. Frog here is one of my favorite characters in that game, and I love his theme song. But this guide here gave us some little more details, talking about some of the different moves and bosses and things like that. So just a good walkthrough here through a portion of the game. Still disappointed that I completely forgot that I had this guide. So just kind of funny to think about. Over on the right, we had a ad here for Destruction Derby. I remember this ad exceptionally well. If you're wondering why, I was 11 years old, going on 12 when this issue came out. Take a look at the ad. I think you'll know why I remember it. I hope she's doing well. I hope life was good to her. She had a good life going forward after this. But yeah, I do very much remember this ad. Never actually played the game, although I heard it was actually pretty fun. And we have one more page here for the Chrono Trigger walkthrough. I think there might be one page after this as well, but just a little bit more of a guide for Chrono Trigger. Then we have our ad over here for Wayne Gretzky hockey. And then, yep, looks like the Chrono Trigger guide is done. Now they're talking about some overseas prospects in Japan. So we got Romancing Saga 3 and then Front Mission Gun Hazard. Now it's kind of crazy seeing them talk about that because Front Mission 3 was actually one of my, probably somewhere in my top 10 favorite PS1 games. I dumped I'd say well over 100 hours into Front Mission 3 playing through both um, campaign routes on that when that came out. So seeing that here, where I kind of saw like the first game being mentioned, is kind of crazy because by the time I got it on the PlayStation several years later, I didn't even remember that this series existed until I picked up Front Mission 3. And then we have a contest ad over here on the right. And then we have our first look here at Super Mario RPG. Now, this game was a ton of fun. I read this and it definitely caught my attention. I rented this game the day it came out on the Super Nintendo. Didn't have enough money to buy it, so I rented it. Had a ton of fun with this game, and it's what really kind of started me in enjoying RPGs. Like I hadn't really played an RPG to this point. I had wanted to try Final Fantasy, and being a dumb kid at the time, I didn't realize that going through and buying, not buying, but renting Final Fantasy Mystic Quest and thinking that's what all RPGs was not actual reality. So I did not like Final Fantasy Mystic Quest whatsoever, and that kind of turned me off from any other RPGs. So the Mario RPG came out. I love Mario, and the game looked awesome, so I decided to give it a try, and I loved it. I loved every second of Mario RPG. It was a ton of fun. I rented it from the video game store like 2 or 3 times. One weekend I went to go rent it again, and they didn't have it. and I was like, well, I need to find something else to play, and then that's when I saw the box for Chrono Trigger, and I was like, well, they don't have Mario RPG in stock. I remember seeing some stuff about this one. Let me try that one. And so if it wasn't for Mario RPG, I never would have played my favorite video game of all time. So Mario RPG is definitely what got me into playing role playing games, and that's probably been my favorite genre ever since. It's not the best RPG I've ever played, obviously. That goes to Chrono Trigger. It might be top 10 because I played a ton of RPGs over the years, but it's still just a fantastic game, and it's still what's responsible for me getting into RPGs in the first place. So I'm definitely glad that I picked up this issue of GamePro. I'm glad I got this. I'm glad I read through this preview they had for it. I'm glad I gave it a chance, and I'm glad they didn't have it in stock that day that I went to go rent it, which led me to Chrono Trigger, which led me back into Final Fantasies, which led me into Xenogears, which led me into Xenosaga, Xenoblade. You know, I've played games out there, other ones now like Persona, the Persona series, Shin Megami Tensei, and just all kinds of other RPGs. So, but all of it started right here. So, very glad that I read this preview. Next, we have another full spread ad here for the 3DO. Just going over into Killing Time and Blade Force. Don't really know much about either one of them. Killing Time, I think, was a cinematic first person shooter. Might have been a light gun shooter, I don't remember. And then Blade Force, I don't know jack about Blade Force. Then we got reviews here for the Game Boy. Super Star Wars Return of the Jedi, which got pretty decent reviews. And then Street Fighter 2. I'm not surprised that got bad reviews because I can't imagine trying to do like any of the moves very well on the cramped little Game Boy, especially for anyone who got like a Game Boy Color or anything like that. I think this is one that would actually play better on a fat Game Boy than on a Game Boy Pocket or Game Boy Color. But even then, just only having two buttons as well, I can't imagine that translate very well. Which I guess Mister the Axe Grinder agreed with. But then we have another ad here for some just Sega sports games: FIFA, Madden, NHL, PGA Tour, um, Sports Illustrated, which I didn't even remember that having a game, but I guess that was on Game Gear. And then yeah, Madden 96 down there, NBA Live, NHL 96. And then of all these games in here, there's one game that's not quite like the others. I don't know why Shaq Fu is in here. So it was mostly Sega with a few Game Boy games in here, and then Shaq Fu. I don't know why why Shaq Fu is in here. But there's Shaq Fu, I guess. So go play Shaq Fu. Why not? And we got some Game Gear reviews. Super Return of the Jedi 5.0. I know with the color graphics on there, I'm not too surprised they'll rate a little bit better than the Game Boy version. And then Batman Forever. We saw the Genesis one earlier, and apparently this one's not any better. I'd be surprised if it was. Then we have ourselves a ad here for Dungeons and Dragons. So this one here looks like it's an intro to Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons still in the 90s wasn't all that big, so it's kind of cool to see an ad for it here. We were definitely past the satanic panic of Dungeons and Dragons, like what it wasn't like what we saw. If you watch Stranger Things, it wasn't like what you saw there, but it still wasn't that popular yet. Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering were still kind of gaining their popularity back in the 90s, so it's kind of cool seeing some ads about it here for that little bit of a nostalgia kick. Then you have an ad here for FIFA 96, another full page ad on both pages. Then we have a strategy guide here for Yoshi's Island. Yoshi's Island is a ton of fun. This one you can play on Switch Online. You can play this all over the place. This one's a little bit easier to get a hold of. But a nice little strategy guide that they have here for it. There's another one where by the time I got around to playing it, I forgot I had the strategy guide, so I haven't used any of it. Which, oh well, it's a side scroller, so not a big deal. Not like you need a ton of hints, but it still would have been nice to know if to have remembered that I could have checked this out for some different tips. But they have a nice guide here going through a fair amount of the game. There's Mario crying. I think anyone who played this game can hear Mario crying just by the mention of Yoshi's Island. Which also makes me wonder though, because as I'm recording this, they just released another trailer for the Mario Galaxy movie. We see Baby Mario and Baby Luigi. So I wonder if that little cry is going to end up coming back to haunt us here when that movie comes out in April. But after that, we have another ad here for Namco, for Ridge Racer, Air Combat, and Tekken. Then we move over to what they called Swap Pro. So video game strategies, weapons, and tactics. So this is basically where they give you like cheat codes or random strategies and things like that. So here we have some details on Ridge Racer, some cheat modes here for Primal Rage, how to play as Idol, which is the final boss, and Killer Instinct. An ad here for Power Surge, which is another card game. Like I said, I didn't play card games back then, so I don't know much about that one. Then we got some tips over here for Gex on 3DO, Mortal Kombat 3, another one for Killer Instinct, Taz and Escape from Mars, Earthworm Jim. We have an ad here for Doom Troopers. Then we got Battle Arena Toshinden. This one I actually remembered to go and look for later. Either that or I found it by accident, but I remember actually using these codes when I went and played Battle Arena Toshinden years after this issue came out and actually looked through here in order to try some of the bosses. I actually did not like the bosses. My favorite character on this, I think her name was, I think it was like Ellie or Ellis. She was the girl with the twin blades. I knew some really good combos with her, and so I played. She was my primary that I would play when it came to Battle Arena Toshinden. So I didn't really like playing as the bosses and all. Then we have some Coast Maker Bomberman, Street Fighter Alpha in the arcades. Then we have an ad for the Super Star Wars Return of the Jedi, which we just saw the reviews for. A few more tips here for Balls on 3DO, Mortal Kombat 3, Neo, and the King of the Fighters on Neo Geo. Then they snuck in some additional artwork here. See some stuff going on here with Mario, Donkey Kong. Well, maybe it's Mario. I can't really tell. That definitely looks like Donkey Kong though. And then Street Fighter art as well. More Killer Instinct codes. Some more artwork over here. Good artwork here of Orchid. Definitely had a little bit of a thing for Orchid back on the in Killer Instinct. Bug, which I don't remember anything about that game on the Saturn. Code here for Mech Warrior. Ad over here for the Sega Channel. Sega Channel was this interesting thing where you could basically, it's almost like streaming games back in the day. You can go and you can find a lot of different videos about details on the Sega Channel. I think Game Historian had a good one that you could check out. We have an ad here for Shockwave 2. Then they have what they call the Fighter's Edge. So this is a pretty good walkthrough for Tekken, showing you all a lot of the different special moves available for the characters. Then we have a contest / ad here for Donkey Kong Country 2. More details here for some of the Tekken moves. Then we have another contest, an ad here for Secret Evermore. More moves here for Tekken. Then we have the Scary Larry's Adventures. This was, from what I could tell, it was almost like a virtual escape room. Only this would be something you do over the phone. But it was another 1-900 number. So there's no way I was ever going to be able to pay $129 a minute to go through this. So hard to say for me to know exactly what this was, but from the way they describe it, definitely sound kind of like a virtual escape room, but by a phone, since we didn't have internet fast enough or anything like that back in the day for that kind of escape room, and real in-person escape rooms weren't really a thing. And we have more details here, more moves and whatnot for Tekken. And we have our ad here for Earthworm Jim 2. Then we have a big old ad and rebates here for Kmart and Interact around their accessories. Kind of crazy that neither company really exists anymore on this page. Then they have GamePro Labs, so this is where they kind of talk about different accessories that came out for various consoles. They kind of give you little details on them. Here's that memory card that I was talking about before that I really wish I had when I had rented the PlayStation. The PlayStation mouse, which not a ton of games would use, but that would be probably useful if you picked up like Warcraft on the PlayStation or maybe Diablo. Then there is the PlayStation 2 link cable over here. So if you had two TVs and two PlayStations, you and a buddy could play and each have your own screen. And then the multi-tap, which lets you do up to 4 players on certain games. So these are probably the ones that are the most interesting to me. All these other ones are third party, I believe, so they wouldn't really catch my attention. And this is the buyer's beware here by the Watchdog. It would just talk about various kind of like consumer questions. Like the first one here, first question here, he has a little bit. I think it's somewhat of a point. I've had my Sega Saturn for about 3 months. I own 4 games. I read that Sega gave out certificates to receive 3 free games: Clockwork Knight, Worldwide Soccer, and Virtual Remix when you purchased a Saturn in September. Like that isn't fair. That means that I spent tons of money for games while other people who just caught onto the bandwagon got them for free. I think that people like me who blew out their savings accounts or started saving their money to get the Saturn the first day it came out should get the free stuff, not the people who just caught on so they wouldn't be considered losers. So he was a little fiery in there, kind of some weird word choice, but I get what he's saying. I'm not gonna lie, I feel like the customer service response from the Sega rep was a little condescending. Um, Sega responds with, anyone who bought a Saturn from May 11th until September 30th received VF Remix for free when they registered their system with Sega at 800-733-7288. Sega then ran a one-time offer for September for 2 free games and Virtual Fighter Remix for anyone who bought a Saturn between September 5th and September 30th. And at this time, we don't plan to extend that short-time promotion. This is a typical industry practice to offer incentives for purchasers who enter the market later or when there are many competitive choices available. Most consumers understand these different marketing strategies. I was like, basically, he's just telling them to go pound sand. You bought it early, piss off. So I thought that was a little condescending. I understand what the Sega rep's saying too. Like, hey, stuff goes on sale all the time or different promos. You buy it when you buy it. But at the same time, he could have been a little bit less of a d bag about it. And then they talk a little bit about here triple play, and then there's a question here asking about if there is a an AC adapter for the Virtual Boy, since the Virtual Boy took 6 batteries, yeah, 6 AA batteries that only lasted 6 hours. So there's a response there from Nintendo saying that you could pick up a AC adapter for $20. But then we have a ad here for Thunderstrike over on the PlayStation. And then we got a preview here for Resident Evil. Resident Evil, I don't really need to talk much about. We all know what Resident Evil turned into. I didn't play through the first one for quite a while. The second one's the one where I played all the way through, but a buddy of mine had it. And that game kind of freaked me out a little bit the first time. I saw parts of it, like the first zombie you see. We all know the scene. But then after that, I got pretty chill with it, and I really liked the second one. And I played through almost all of the GameCube remake when that came out. I remember I got, I think, a little bit past the shark in there, and then I think I was a senior in high school. And I was trying to play through it, and I just got busy, and I never actually ended up finishing it. Then we have a preview here for Loaded. Loaded was a wild game. There's not really another way to describe it. It was just Loaded and Loaded 2 were just crazy. That's all you need to know. Um, Very gory, very violent, just very much a product of its time. It was just a crazy game, crazy concept. Everything about it was just off the wall. I won't go any more than that. They have a preview here for Breath of Fire 2, which, like I said earlier, I think is probably the best of the series. Then we have an ad here for Earthbound, which that one was kind of a for years just kind of a unknown until finally kind of blew up on the nostalgia side of things. And I played through quite a bit of it. I haven't quite finished it yet, but it's one I wish I could have I would have played way back in the day when it first came out. We got a preview here then for Zero Divide, which I've never heard of. Scramble Cobra, same thing. Solar Eclipse, no idea. Then we have an ad here for Chips and Bits. This is where you could actually call in and order video games, basically kind of like just the equivalent of ordering online. You could order by phone and they'd have it shipped to your house. I never ordered anything from Chips and Bits because, like, if I was going to order something, I would just prefer to go to the store to buy it when possible. We got previews here for NHL Face Off, World Series Baseball, FIFA Soccer 96, and Foes of Ali. Just another batch of sports games. Then we have the GamePro holiday picks over here, talking about some different players' guides available that you could order. Never did order any of those either. A few more previews here. We got Toy Story, Gargoyles, Captain Quasar, which I heard is actually one of a 3DO game that's actually really good. Never did play it myself, but I've heard good things about it. And then Darkstalkers, the Night Warriors. Darkstalkers was awesome. It was. I wish I had played that when it first came out. I ended up actually playing it on the PSP, as because I think that was one of the early. It was either a launch title or an early release on the PSP. Loved it on the PSP. Wish I had played it on the PlayStation. I did eventually pick it up on one of the Capcom fighting collections, but wish I had played it when it first came out on the original PlayStation. Next, we have an ad for Funko Land. Funko Land, I actually did order from. They had a used copy of Star Trek: The Next Generation, and I was a huge Trekkie when I was a kid. Still love Star Trek today, but I was a huge Trekkie as a kid, and I really liked the Star Trek game for the Super Nintendo, Star Trek: The Next Generation, and I could not find it anywhere around where I lived. I lived kind of like in a cow town, and the local city hub I go to wasn't that much better, so there wasn't a ton of options for used games, and the game was too old to show up new on the shelves. So I actually ended up ordering that from Funko and got that shipped to me. Um, Funko has quite the history as well. They eventually became part of GameStop, if I remember correctly. There was Funko Land, there was Babbage's, software, etc., and then all that stuff eventually kind of got thrown into GameStop, Electronics Boutique. So all those companies, I think, all eventually rolled into what became GameStop. But they always had this little gift certificate you could try to win here. Somehow I could never quite remember figure out the answers to all of the questions. So like Aladdin's sweetheart would be Jasmine. Johnny Cage's profession would be actor. Insect or video game star for 4 across. Oh, was that maybe Bug? Was that what that was from before? Maybe that's what that was. And then General or Dragoon for 5 across. I don't know what that means. And then Feline or video game system would be Jaguar. And then 2 across was Mick and or 2 down was Mick and what? Mac maybe? I don't know. I never could really figure it out. I don't think I just figured it out now either, but you'd see these Funko ads a lot, and they'd have different crosswords for you to try to win a gift certificate, but I never could get them all right. Then they have PC Game Pro. They talk a little bit here about Bad Mojo and The Dig. Nothing I was ever familiar with. And then we would see these ads here for the ultimate gaming rig and over $20,000 in prizes. And you would have to pay to enter. And you go through, you fill out this you'd have to work on this mystery word grid to come up with a mystery word. We always figured out the mystery word here was power. And the question everyone always had was, did anyone ever win the damn thing? Honestly, everything about this just screams scam. Everyone dreamed of winning it, but I know I never entered it. I don't know if anybody I knew ever mentioned entering it, but it would be really cool. You get yourself, supposedly you could win and get the whole thing. Get a whole like new TV and an awesome sound system, and then all the current game consoles. Like they had the Jaguar, the Saturn, the 3DO, the PlayStation, heck, even the Virtual Boy was in there. And then what was a really beefy at the time gaming PC with a whole Pentium 133, 16 megs of RAM 1.2 gig hard drive, CD-ROM, a 17-inch monitor, modem, and more. Like that was the top of the line back in the day. Like your cell phone is probably about 50 to 100 times better than this thing is. This PC is at this point, but at the time, the thing was awesome. But yeah, I've never heard of anyone ever winning that. I'm sure that whole thing was just a scam. I should probably look into the. I should look into it. The history of these pandemonium sweepstakes you could enter. Then we go into more PC games over here. Talk a little about Siberia, Rebel Assault 2, which is a pretty awesome game. Fight Unlimited, and then Carandia Book 3, Malcolm's Revenge, which I know nothing about that. And then they had Crave over here, which looks like it was kind of like some video game merch. Nothing I ever really got into, but it was something I probably should look more into back in the day, considering how hard it would be to find like video game shirts and things like that back in the day. Then they have their overseas prospects. They talk a little bit more about things that are coming out soon. Here we see Battle Arena Toshinden 2. Tactics Ogre. That's one I wish I played back when it came out. Lunar Remix for the Saturn, which I didn't even know they did a Lunar Remix. Even when I played the Silver Star Story Complete, I only knew about the original Lunar and then the new one for the PlayStation. I didn't know they did a Lunar Remix for the Saturn. Namco Museum, which we've seen a ton of those now. Datana Twin Bee Yahoo Deluxe Pack. I have no idea what that is whatsoever. Then we got this Super Family Galande, maybe? I don't know what that is either. And then they got more pro news over here, talking about the sales difference between the PlayStation and the Saturn. Talking a little about 3DO. Giving some sales numbers here for Killer Instinct, which Killer Instinct was actually pretty cool back on the Super Nintendo. I wish I was better at it. I could do a decent combo with Cinder, and I could do an okay combo with Saber Wolf. And anyone else though, I was just absolute trash with. But then they have a few more details here. This part was always cool. The December hot sheet from Blockbuster showing what some of their most popular games were. Super NES to Genesis on here. So we got Killer Instinct, Mortal Kombat 3, NBA Live, Earthworm Jim. Over on Genesis, you got Madden, NBA Live, Part Time Football, Mortal Kombat 3, Earthworm Jim. So a few more sports games, I think, on the Genesis side. The numbers on here didn't have Donkey Kong Country yet, but we'll see that one probably number one the following month. And then they talk about the GamePro advertising sales office. So if you want to advertise, like, hey, here's how you get a hold of us. And I always like this part here, the index of advertisers. So if you ever want to like show somebody an ad for a game, you can actually take a look here. If you remember who made it, you could see what pages they advertised on. So it's actually pretty easy to find certain games that certain game advertisements that were in the issue. And then we got a few more details over here, kind of a continuation of the pro news and whatnot. And hot news for GamePro Online. Them talking a little bit about the launch of the keyword GamePro, and then random details here about the TurboGrafx 16, which I didn't think I saw anything about that mentioned earlier in this episode or in this issue, but that was actually a pretty decent system, although I never had one myself. And then here's the GamePro 900 line for you to get tips. Again, same detail as the other ones. Nothing I ever would have called. A little more detail here on getting into GamePro Online, and then talking about how to get AOL as well. And then a random ad for Claricel, which is these pads you use to kind of clean your face if you had pimples. Ad for Garfield to close it out, and then as it says here at the end, made with love by Retromag. So I mentioned it at the start of this. Take a look at retromags.com. It's a really great site for having a lot of these really high quality scans of these old retro magazines. But that is the December 1995 issue of GamePro magazine. Again, the first issue of GamePro that I ever bought, the first video game magazine I ever bought with my own money. it's still nice having a really good nostalgia kick going through and checking out that magazine. Um, just seeing how things were back in the 90s, how far we've come in a lot of ways, and how maybe how backwards we've gone in some others. But it's really cool to kind of reread these magazines, and it's really cool just kind of talking about them, seeing how some of these franchises have continued on 30 years later, seeing how reading one little 1 2 page article about Mario RPG led to me finding my favorite game of all time and to becoming a really big player of RPGs, and just the way that little butterfly effect of like you saw that seeing something and what it ends up leading to down the road. But again, that's the December 95 issue of GamePro magazine. Thanks for sticking around. Feel free to leave any comments or thoughts on there. I'll probably be going over some other mags later in the future. Don't know how many people will actually watch this, but this is more of just a fun thing I'm doing. So whether we get a couple people watching or quite a few, doesn't matter too much. But for those of you who are here, thanks for sticking around, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.